Good evening, children. Nana Janet here. I've got another story. This is ENID BLYTON. Hello, Mr. Twiddle. I'm going to be reading from page 20, and the title is, this is the second chapter in the book, Mr. Twiddle Gets a Shock. I hope you're sitting comfortably. Mr. Twiddle was always doing something silly. Well, did you ever hear the tale of what happened when he threw his handkerchief into the fire by mistake? I'll tell you. It happened one morning when Mr. Twiddle was opening his letters by the kitchen fire. In the old days, we had fires in our kitchen. Now you have radiators and fans and things, but when I was a child, we had a fire, and they were cold in the mornings, and you had to light them, but you had to clean them out first. You know, it was a messy job. Very cold in the mornings. Oh. You can throw the envelopes into the fire, said Mrs. Twiddle. It will save me fetching the waste paper basket, because you had to get the paper, the newspapers, squiggle them around and get the sticks, and you'd lay them across the coal. You'd have the coal in there, but you needed lots of sticks and paper and firelighters and things to make the fire burn. So she'd use waste papers out of the waste paper basket. Well, Mr. Twiddle, at that moment, he felt he was going to sneeze. So with an envelope in one hand and his best white silk handkerchief in the other, he sat in his chair, waiting for the sneeze to come. And when it did come, a tissue! Oh, a tissue! Mr. Twiddle caught the sneeze in the envelope and threw his handkerchief, quite by mistake, into the fire. Well, of course, he was terribly upset as soon as he had done this, and he tried to rake the handkerchief out of the fire. A bit of burning coal fell on the rug and scorched a hole at once. Mrs. Twiddle came running in when she smelt the smell of burning, and how she scolded Mr. Twiddle. Catching a sneeze in an envelope and throwing your best handkerchief on the fire, she snorted, pouring water on the burning rug. Whatever will you do next, Mr. Twiddle? Don't you know the difference between a handkerchief and an envelope? You'll be poking the fire with your pencil and trying to write with the poker next. You might have had the whole house on fire. Go out for a walk, do, and don't come in till dinner time. Poor Mr. Twiddle. He was really very unhappy about his best handkerchief. He got up, found his hat, put it on back to front, and went into the village. And very soon he met old Mrs. Gabble, who always loved a chat. When she saw Mr. Twiddle looking so upset, she stopped. What's the matter? She said. Oh, said Mr. Twiddle, a dreadful thing happened this morning. I threw my handkerchief on the fire by mistake, and it got burnt. And when I tried to get it out of the flames, some burning coal fell on the carpet and— Oh, good gracious me, said Mrs. Gabble. No wonder you feel upset. Then she caught sight of Sally Simple, and she hurried to tell her the news. But of course, she added a bit to it to make it even more exciting. Oh, Sally Simple, she cried. "Have you heard what happened at the Twiddle's house this morning? Why, poor old Twiddle threw his handkerchief on the fire by mistake, and in getting it out the fire fell onto the rug and set it all ablaze." "Goodness me," said Sally, quite frightened. "And did the kitchen catch alight?" "I expect so," said Mrs. Gabble happily. "Oh yes, I'm sure it blazed up on the ceiling." Sally Simple was thrilled. She longed to tell someone about the fire at the Twiddles. She saw Dame Shoo over the way and rushed to tell her. "Oh, Dame Shoo," she said, "have you heard of the terrible fire at poor Mrs. Twiddle's this morning?" "No," said Dame Shoo, startled. "What about it?" "Oh, Mr. Twiddle dropped his handkerchief in the fire, and that started a dreadful burning," said Sally Simple. "Yes, the rug caught fire and the flames shot up the ceiling. The whole kitchen was on fire." "Oh, but how dreadful," said Dame Shoo. "I suppose the house will be burnt down." "Yes, sure to be," said Sally Simple. "I do wonder if the fire engines have gone to see it. And don't you think we ought to offer to give the Twiddles a bed for tonight? Because with their house burnt down, they'll have nowhere to sleep." "Yes, yes," said Dame Shoo. "I'll go and tell everyone else, Sally, and we'll see what we can do." She hurried off, longing to tell someone the news. On the way she passed the fire station. She peeped inside, and to her very great surprise, she saw the big fire engine still there. It hadn't gone to the Twiddles. I say," cried Dame Shoo, rushing into the fire station in a great hurry. "Haven't you heard of the dreadful fire at the Twiddles' house? It will be burnt to nothing if you don't hurry at once." "First we've heard of it," cried the captain of the fire brigade, and he sounded the big fire bell at once. In 3 minutes every fireman was in his place, complete with helmet. With a loud clang-clanging of bells, the great red fire engine roared out of the building. Clang, 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 it sped away to Mr. Twiddle's house. Everyone ran after it to see where it was going. It stopped outside Mr. Twiddle's house. The fireman undid the long hose and looked for the fire. Mrs. Twiddle looked out of the window. She saw the fire engine. She saw the fireman unwinding the hose. She saw the crowds and crowds of people. Whatever had they all come for? She opened the door and looked out. "Hi, Mrs. Twiddle, where's the fire?" shouted the men. "What fire?" asked Mrs. Twiddle in the greatest astonishment. "The fire we've come to put out," said the men. "Well, there's only one fire in the house, and that's in the kitchen grate," said Mrs. Twiddle, even more astonished. "And I'm sure I don't want that put out, thank you." At that moment Mr. Twiddle walked up, looking as surprised as he could be to see such a crowd round his house. "You said there was a terrible fire in your house," cried Dame Shoo. "I didn't," said Mr. Twiddle indignantly. "You did!" shouted everyone. "I only told Mrs. Gabble I had burnt my handkerchief by mistake," shouted Mr. Twiddle, and he went inside and banged the door. The fire engine turned round and drove off in disgust. Everyone went home. Mrs. Twiddle stared at Mr. Twiddle crossly. "Do you need to bring the fire engine here and have half the town just because you happen to have burnt your handkerchief?" she said. "Really, Mr. Twiddle, please don't do any more foolish things today." "Don't worry, I shan't," said Mr. Twiddle gloomily. and he threw his hat into the waste paper basket and hung up his newspaper on a peg. Well, really, Mr. Twiddle. Thank you for listening, children. This is Nana Janet. If you're watching Abraham and Jad, and maybe Jude, I hope you didn't find that too young for you, Jude. God bless. Bye-bye.